Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Most of us who hear stories about survivors of domestic violence and their efforts to protect themselves and their children in court initially assume that those family courts are a traditional point of legal refuge, always protective of vulnerable children and reflexively responsive to abuse concerns. But far too often, we're confronted by confounding and devastating examples in news reports and sometimes through the experiences of our own family and friends of domestic violence survivors and their children being re-traumatized through the family court process. And all too often, when women, children, or both report abuse by a father in a case concerning child custody or visitation, the courts refuse to believe them. Judges will sometimes actually further punish and traumatize the mother by nevertheless awarding generous custody or visitation rights to the allegedly abusive father. The harm to both children and their protective but traumatized mothers from these frequent family court practices is significant. And worst of all, family courts' refusals to take seriously one parent's claims of abuse and violence have led to hundreds of cases of homicide involving those children, and sometimes the adults who try and protect them. On this edition of Then There's California, we'll hear about the experiences domestic survivors have in family court, the sometimes sobering and heartbreaking aftermath of those decisions, the imperative legal efforts to improve the court's response to domestic abuse, and the perspectives on this important issue from legislative champions, advocates, and domestic violence survivors themselves. Susan Rubio is the California State Senator representing the 22nd Senate District of California in the San Gabriel Valley. And for years, Senator Rubio was a public school teacher in Southern California. And before being elected to the Senate in 2018, Senator Rubio was a local government leader in the city of Baldwin Park. And if you are familiar with her story and policy priorities, you know that Senator Rubio is herself a survivor of domestic violence and has been a longtime champion of domestic violence policies and is a nationally and internationally recognized advocate for victims. And she's also the chair of the Senate Committee on Insurance. Senator Rubio was last with us, I think, pre-pandemic to discuss domestic violence legislation and to share her story. And we are proud to have her back again in 2022. She joins us by phone from her district in Southern California. Senator Rubio, it's been a long time, but we're glad to have you join us. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having us here today. And yes, it's so important that we continue the conversation on domestic violence. And that has been my mission since I started in the legislature since 2018, passing laws that will strengthen the laws, but also give victims more protection. And we find that even when there's evidence that someone is dangerous, we still continue to fail not only our victims, but our children. I want to highlight three particular cases. One, in February in Sacramento, there was a church shooting. There's three precious little girls, 13-year-old Samia, 10-year-old Samantha, and 9-year-old Samara. These little girls were victims at the hands of their father, and it had to do with a domestic violence case. We also have another case recently in Sacramento, another shooting where 6 people were dead and 12 were injured, and the suspected shooters had been arrested and had also allegations of domestic violence. There was another case where an individual in Santa Clara County also murdered his 9 co-workers, once again had been accused of domestic violence and being aggressive. The reason I want to highlight some of these cases is that sometimes we know that domestic violence is dangerous, and in these cases, it's unrecognized. We don't know when the trigger is going to go off. And like in the case of the shooting in Sacramento at the club, more often than not, there's bystanders. And the reason I needed to highlight this because victims are loud about their abusers. They're loud about having a restraining order, but sometimes the protections are not there to go a little further. So today I wanted to highlight some of the bills that I have that we're working on this legislative year. And I think it's time that we hear victims and we understand the danger. And if a mother tells a court or pleads for help, I think that we always need to pause and always err on the side of caution. In this case, we lost these precious children to something that could have been prevented. So I want to highlight one law in particular as it pertains to those 3 little girls that were murdered in Sacramento, and that is my SB 1265, the Right to Pause Act. Many parents continue to go back to court and ask the judge to please reconsider their cases. And more often than not, again, they're being ignored. So my bill will give a victim the ability to pause visitations, take the case back to court, and have that case be reassessed. In the case of the 3 little girls, there have been an arrest made. The man had assaulted a police officer and was arrested. He was held on a 5150 on involuntary psychiatric evaluation. So we start seeing this pattern of escalation, and parents, raise the red flag and say, please help me, this is happening, and they have no recourse. So hopefully my bill will give those parents the ability to go back to court immediately, pause the visitation rights until their case can be heard, reassessed, and really see if that person continues to escalate and really can be that dangerous to murder their children. So hopefully we continue to pass that and get it through both houses, which is the Senate and the Assembly. Another bill that I have is SB 616, which is called Peaky's Law, the Save Child Act. And we have Peaky's mother here with us today. She will go into details about her case. California can receive critical federal funding to further protect victims of child abuse and domestic violence by prioritizing child safety in our family court systems, and it will also align with the federal provisions within the Violence Against Women Act. If we are successful, we will be able to draw down approximately $5 million a year for 5 years. And again, this is so important because we continue to see that the system, I feel, is not flawed, but it's broken enough that it's skewed to always benefit the abuser. And little by little, I've been trying to tackle these issues to ensure that the victim has more rights. And with all the power that I feel I have to change laws and protect victims, especially children, it's very frustrating being a legislator because things move so slowly in the legislature. And it's really sad to me when I hear these cases happening where children are dying at the hands of the abuser. But we do have to get it right. But again, when we think of laws, we always have to put the child first. It seems to me a lot of the times we're thinking of the father's rights or the mother's rights. It could be either parent. But the reality is that sometimes we fail to understand that the immediate danger is also for the child. And so I'm trying really hard to make sure that these victims have a way to pause, take a breath. That is going to be my goal this year to push these policies forward. But I also want to give the opportunity to my guest to tell her story because I could only write laws, but I also want your listeners to understand how personal it is.
Absolutely. And Senator, you have carefully and thoughtfully set the scene for us with the description of your legislation. And I definitely want to bring into the discussion now our 2 additional podcast guests. We are privileged to have with us Ana Estevez, the mother of Armazd Andresian Jr., Peaky, as he was and will always be known to his family and to the world. In the spring of 2017, after going missing during a family court-imposed unsupervised visitation with his father, then 5-year-old Peaky was killed by his father, apparently to get back at his estranged wife, Ana, who had filed for divorce, citing domestic violence and threats. Peaky went missing for 2 months until his body was found near Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County. His father was charged and convicted and sentenced for 25 years to life for Peaky's murder. This week, as we speak, marks the 5th anniversary of Peaky's death, and in the 5 years since that terrifying and heartbreaking time, Ana Estevez, who is a military veteran and a former educator, has become a strong advocate for child safety and has successfully fought for legislation that protects children, especially in family courts. Ana Estevez joins us by phone from Southern California, and Ana, I think all of us here and everyone who knows your story and Peaky's story would sacrifice their souls in a heartbeat so that you didn't have to commemorate such a difficult anniversary as this one, marking your sweet son's death. But I'm very grateful that you're here with us anyway. Welcome.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Senator Rubio, for having me here today. I just want to start by saying how honored I am to be here to discuss what happens in family court and with Child Protective Services and the tragedies that affect, obviously, so many lives and the decisions that are made that are not only harmful to families but can end the life of a child, as in my son's case. This topic is so important, and the public needs to be educated because oftentimes, unless it happens to a person, it's just another story that we hear on the news. And I will be honest, I operated in that mindset for many, many years until it happened to me. And when it happened to me, my life obviously changed forever, and I lost my son in the process.
Thank you, Anna. And I know your advocacy since that time has been part of a healing process and a process of reaching out to other parents and families facing a similar situation. And we are also joined by Kathleen Russell, who is the founding executive director of the Center for Judicial Excellence based in San Rafael. Kathleen joins us by phone from San Rafael. Glad to have you with us, Kathleen. Welcome.
Great to be here, Brian, and thank you so much to the Senator and to Anna. I know we've all done a lot of work on these issues over the years, and we're going to continue to do so until children are better protected in the family court system.
Well, Kathleen, give us a quick primer on the work that you do and the work of the Center for Judicial Excellence.
Sure. The Center for Judicial Excellence has been in California for 16 years. We're committed to protecting child abuse and domestic violence survivors in our nation's family courts and to fostering accountability throughout the judicial branch. So we've been a voice for vulnerable children, partnering with protective mothers like Anna around the country. We worked for over 2 years with Caden Mancuso's mother, Kathy Sherlock, who tragically lost her 7-year-old daughter on a court-ordered, unsupervised visit, just like Anna's precious Peaky. And we have been tracking these homicides by divorcing and separating parents across the country. There are over 830 children since 2008 who've been murdered by a divorcing or separating parent. And it's a crisis of child safety, and one that we're thrilled we were able to get the president in March to sign Caden's Law as part of the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, which for the first time puts into federal policy protections for children in custody cases. Quite a plethora of provisions that will really go a long way toward protecting kids. What it does do is incentivize states to pass legislation to modernize their child custody laws by prioritizing child safety. And as the Senator mentioned, will bring upwards of $25 million to the state of California starting in 2023 if we're able to get the legislation passed this session. I'm just going to talk about 4 aspects of this legislation, and this is, we're referencing it as Peaky's Law in honor of Anna and all the incredible work she's done as an advocate for child safety. We pounded the halls in Congress back in 2018, getting the first ever resolution passed by the House of Representatives on child safety in family courts, and Anna was a tireless advocate with us as we got that passed by the House. We also worked on Peaky's resolution in the California legislature with the Senator's sister, Assemblywoman Blanca Rubio. So we're hopeful that Peaky's Law in California will really take this opportunity that we have through VAWA funding to bring funding to California and better protect children. So our legislation would restrict expert testimony in family courts to those who have actual credentials and demonstrated experience working with victims of intimate partner violence and child abuse. Right now, there are many people working as experts and hired folks in these cases that do not have that expertise, and that's a big part of the problem. The bill would also eliminate the use of reunification camps or therapies that cannot be scientifically proven to be safe or effective. This is a growing trend that is very disturbing. Children are basically being sent to threat therapy programs costing $20,000 to $40,000 for 4 days, where they essentially try to convince children that they were not abused. by their parent and force them into contact with their abusive parent, at the same time removing them from any contact with the parent they're attached and bonded to. So our bill would sort of eliminate this dangerous practice. And then we also would provide evidence-based training, which I know this is a big priority for the senator, domestic violence and child abuse training for judges and all court personnel involved in family law cases. And this would include coercive control and child abuse as part of the training. I know Anna and the senator both worked to get coercive control bill passed in our legislature. And then finally, believe it or not, judges are not currently required to consider any past or current sexual or physical abuse committed by an accused parent in child custody proceedings. So our legislation would ensure that this very relevant history be something that judges must consider when making custody determinations.
Thank you for sharing all of that, everything going on legislatively. And as the layman here, hearing all of this and doing some research and study prior to this conversation, it still boggles my mind that despite our increasing awareness of domestic violence issues, advocacy for parents and children facing it, that women's reports of domestic violence are still so widely rejected in what is the most critical of settings, the family court. What is your reaction to my reaction of surprise?
Thank you, Brian. Well, the reason these stories are so important is that people still don't believe, which is, as you stated, Brian, really shocking to me that, these allegations sometimes are rejected. I personally can attest to the fact that it took me a little while to speak up, and we hear it all the time from just general public. Why didn't the victim leave? I don't believe it, or else she would have left, and things like that. And I want to just encourage anyone listening that it's different for every victim. There's victims that have children to think about, and one of the most dangerous times is when a victim leaves her or his abuser.
That's right.
Is the most dangerous
That's absolutely
time.
true.
So they have to think about their children. And for other people like myself, I happen to have been in the public eye, so it took me a little while to gather the courage to want to say something. So for every victim is a different story, and we should not judge a victim for taking their time to come to a good place where they have help, where they feel they can leave safely, where they feel their children are going to be okay. And that is something that we need to always keep in mind. It's a different story, different considerations, and we need to stop judging victims or victim shaming, and that happens all the time. Going back to the original bill that I passed, which was 1141, coercive control, I think traditionally, even myself, as we're growing up, we're always taught that domestic violence is something that you need to see. And what I mean is you need to see the bruise, the broken bone, the black eye. And if you don't see that, we think that abuse is not happening. So the reason why coercive control was so groundbreaking is that it now recognizes all the psychological trauma that victims have to go through. And sometimes I would say it's harder to overcome that psychological trauma than the bruise or the broken bone. I've interviewed hundreds of women, and the stories are pretty horrific. One in particular, her abuser tied her up for several days, starved her. She was delirious for several days. And so when you have that kind of trauma, it took her, I believe she said, approximately 8 years to really get over what had happened to her. And she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. And it is a serious, serious issue. It wasn't physical, but it was the torture, all the mental stress that she went through. So, this is just a way of educating our public that we need to be vigilant. It doesn't always have to be that broken bone or black eye. We need to pay attention. I do talks around schools and high schools, and I start with very simple things for them to start recognizing what coercive control is. I ask students, has your boyfriend ever taken your phone away to look at your messages? And more often than not, they all raise their hands. That is an indication that someone is being controlling when someone wants to see who you're texting, what you're texting, and really monitor everything that you do. They'll start telling some of these young ladies what to wear, how to wear their makeup, And it goes a little further. Then they start telling them who they can be friends with. And it starts very gradually, very slowly. And before you know it, you have a victim who is isolated. And that's where the real torture trauma comes in. You have a victim that is found herself or himself in a situation that they can't get out. And normally we need a support system. But when an abuser has done a great job of isolating the victim, that becomes even more impossible to get out of. So I really just want to make sure that our listeners hear that. And for mothers out there, I say that all the time. Parents always will ask their teen daughter or, adult daughter or son, is he hitting you? And I tell parents to change the way they address the issue, because now it's not just, are they physically assaulting you, but are you being coerced? Do you have the freedom to come and see us? Do you have the freedom to go pick your friends and hang out with your friends? The minute that is compromised, you get a sense that the relationship is already escalating to a point that the physical abuse happens after all the psychological abuse. So keep that in mind to any parent listening out there. And I want to just turn it over to Anna, because I met Anna many years ago before I became a senator. And I think she may remember this. I was a council member, local council member. She is from my city, and she was telling her story about Piki. And she had Piki's ashes right next to the microphone. And I had just gone through my trauma, my divorce. And I talked to her separately, and I could not stop crying. But I remember I listened to her. I saw Piki's ashes. I remember that's when, we connected on a more personal level. And I've always been an advocate for Anna. I know her mother as well. And I want to know Piki. And I know you've told me stories, but I want the listeners to know who Piki was. And if you don't mind, can you share?
Of course. Thank you. So one of the common questions I get is Piki his real name? And my response is always, no, it's not. It's a nickname that I gave him from the time he was born. And originally I called him Piquito. And that came about because when I was a little girl, my father, who has since passed, called me Piquita, which is the female or the feminine version of the word. And so after my son was born, I shortened it and I called him Piki for years. And there are multiple reasons that I continue to do that, primarily because he is named, or he was named after his father, and I don't think that name, I don't associate that name with my son anymore. My son was an incredible child, and I say that in an unbiased manner because I have been in education for 25 years, and I have never met a child like Piki. He exuded pure love. He always had a smile on his face. He was very sensitive, very kind, highly intelligent. He loved learning. He loved life. He loved books. And so many people who have met him have said that he was an old soul. He was here before, and he would say things that were well beyond his years, things that would make any adult kind of think twice about what a 4 or 5-year-old child said. He was amazing. He was the love of my life, and he still is.
You called him your sunshine, isn't that right?
Yes. So we used to sing together a lot, and one of his favorite songs was "You Are My Sunshine." And we used to sing that song together, and he is my eternal sunshine. He is the first thing that I think of every morning when I see the light.
That's very sweet. Thank you for sharing the story of Piki. Anna, as we talk about the issues going on in family court and the issues involving Senator Rubio's legislation, does all of this mirror your experience in family court with Piki's father, the challenges you had with the court and the fights over custody? Can you give us a little bit of background and perspective on that experience?
Oh, absolutely. Senator Rubio talked about coercive control, and it wasn't until the latter part of my marriage and even after I requested a divorce that I realized what was actually happening throughout my marriage and beyond. And my ex-husband was very good at manipulation, very abusive when it came to my emotions, and very controlling. Some of the things that he would do, one comment that resonated profoundly with me before my son was born. I always refer to Piki as my miracle child because he truly was my gift from God. Before he was born, I had 5 miscarriages, and my ex-husband told me on a few occasions that he didn't consider me a woman if I couldn't have a baby.
I'm sorry.
He would, when I was at work, at the time of my son's disappearance, I was an elementary school principal, and he would call me multiple times at work to ask me what I was doing, who I saw, who I talked with, which in that line of work, obviously, I have contact with many, many people. But it was something that he constantly drilled me on. He did things such as install spyware on my telephone, my cell phone, and was aware of conversations or text messages that I had or had shared. He hacked into one of my social media accounts and created a ghost account and then sent out connection requests to others using my profile. Toward the end, after I had shared with him that I wanted a divorce, he stole my credit cards and my passport and refused to return them. I actually had to have law enforcement get involved, and the detective that I worked with the LA County Sheriff's Department, basically told him that if he didn't return them, that he would file charges against him for identity theft, primarily, and for stealing a passport, which is obviously illegal. Needless to say, those items were returned a few days later, grudgingly. After I moved out of the family residence, the day that I left, and as Senator Rubio said, that's the hardest time, the most dangerous time, I was very afraid the day that I left. I left work early, went to the family home, and loaded my vehicle with whatever would fit for me and my son. And that's what I left with. The majority of my belongings and my son's belongings remained in the house because I had believed that I would have an opportunity to go back at a later time to retrieve our stuff, which didn't happen because when we appeared in court, I received a telephone call from opposing counsel while I was at work on the playground supervising recess. And opposing counsel informed me that I needed to report to court the next day on an ex parte hearing. And of course, I do not have a legal background. I'm not an attorney. So everything that was related to court, I was very anxious about. So I went to court, and because I had moved out, the judge granted my ex-husband exclusive rights to the family home, which meant that I could not go back and get anything without his permission. And in the end, he basically disposed of all of my personal belongings, my son's belongings. I had heirlooms that I had since I was a child. When I was in the military, I earned different medals while serving, and those disappeared. So everything that is basically irreplaceable disappeared. And that's how my divorce started, with me losing rights to everything, pretty much.
I am grateful to you, Anna, for sharing this incredible story, and I think all of us can viscerally feel what you are going through. I know in 2018 you sued L.A. County and alleging that the Department of Children and Family Services was partly to blame for Piki's death, and you had said the department knew about the abuse by his father, that Piki was scared of his father, but they granted his father partial custody and unmonitored visitation anyways. What was the resolution of that suit?
It was dismissed because so the lawsuit was not only against DCFS, but it was also against the judge and the court evaluator who was involved in my case. And because judges have absolute immunity, he was basically untouchable. So the judge and the court evaluator and the 4 DCFS employees who were involved in my son's death live today. And they wake up every day, they see the sun, they have their family, they have the life that they've always had. And unfortunately, because of their carelessness and their lack of empathy and just overall lack of willingness to objectively evaluate evidence, they made really, really poor choices that resulted in my son's death.
And Senator Rubio, Anna's story and the outcome of this obviously points to the necessity and the immediacy of getting your bills passed and signed by the governor.
Absolutely. And Peaky's law in particular, I previously mentioned, it would require 40 hours of judicial training on domestic violence and child abuse, and will also include 20 hours of ongoing training every 2 years. And I think the mistake we all make is that we assume everyone has been through either domestic violence or knows abuse personally. When you don't know what to look for or what signs there are, I mean, it's harder to assess. So I'm really excited to pass this bill to ensure that there's training where we have cases that are reviewed and they can see what it looks like. And as Anna mentioned, abusers become really good at manipulating the system. They present themselves sometimes very well, and victims are not believed. And so my heart goes out to not just Anna, but all the mothers out there who have lost their children. And I've talked to several parents who, like Anna, went back to court and they actually say that they fear for the life of their children. And I think that should be an automatic. When someone says, I fear for the life of my child, I think we should really take a moment to pause and just analyze what that means for that child. And we should always take any allegations seriously, especially when it comes to children. But again, I'm so excited to pass this bill because it will require 40 hours of training. And the initial course of control bill that I also passed required police training. And so we're trying to tackle the issue from all angles, and it's not still going to be a perfect system, but we are going to continue to make progress. Every step that we take forward is a step that can save that one child's life and help a victim. So I want to reiterate my thanks to Kathleen and Anna and all the advocates who continue to work with me. We brainstorm, we try to tackle what we see in real time. And when these cases are happening pretty much every single day in our, when we see it in the news, it's something that we need to continue to push for. So again, I want to make sure that Kathleen knows how appreciative I am of all the work they've been doing with my office. And Anna, I will continue to be a friend for life. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that story about Peaky. We're going to make sure that no one ever forgets Peaky and who he was. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And Kathleen, as we wrap up, I want to also give you the opportunity to tell us what's next for you and the Center for Judicial Excellence. Obviously, your job has not finished in many, many ways, nationally, but also here in California. What's next for you and the center?
Well, we are very focused and working with the Senator's office on Peaky's law, and so that is going to be a lot of our focus this session. We're also working with new committee that was formed that is 6 years of work that got us the first ever audit of the Commission on Judicial Performance. It took over 3 years to get that through, and very high profile lawsuit. And we worked with the Assembly Judiciary Committee last session and Chairman Mark Stone to get a committee that would go through line by line and look at this audit and potentially completely restructure and reform how judges are disciplined in California. So we had our first hearing or meeting with that committee this past week, and there have been just phenomenal appointments to that process. And so that is a process that will result in a report to the legislature and the governor in March of 2023. And we are thrilled that that process is moving forward, and hopefully the wonderful work of the state auditor's office will result in some really meaningful change in ensuring that the public is protected from judicial misconduct. And that is the focus and the mission of the CJP. So we've got a lot of work to do. And as I say, we're thrilled to be working with Senator Rubio and Anna on Peaky's Law, and we'll continue to fight on these issues as long as they need to be fought, and that is going to be quite some time.
Indeed. And Ana Estevez, as we wrap, I know Peaky is with you as your sunshine, guiding you. What is ahead for you as you continue your work as a child safety advocate? Tell us about what is ahead and how you are going to continue to keep Peaky's memory alive through legislation and advocacy and faith and love.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, my first goal is to get Peaky's Law passed, but there are other areas of family law that I would like to look at in the future. One area in particular is adding additional members to, I believe it's Family Code 4325, which discusses when a spouse attempts to murder or murders their spouse, and they are automatically exempted from claiming any insurance or property or anything like that. And unfortunately, the way the law is currently written only applies to the spouse. It does not include the child or immediate family members. And the reason this is so important to me is because this time last year, 4 years after my son's murder, I had to go before a judge to beg the judge to not award my ex-husband, who's currently serving 25 years to life, a portion of my retirement.
Wow.
Yes. So that's one of many items on the list that I have.
Sure. So your personal fight continues in addition to any advocacy you do outside of your own life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Ana, I appreciate you taking the time to be part of this. I know you've done so many of these types of interviews over the years, and you may be used to it, but I can only imagine there's still a lot of pain and grief. Obviously, every time you share Peaky's story, I guess you could say grief by 1,000 quotes, but thank you anyway for being part of this conversation. And Kathleen, thank you for your advocacy and your leadership of the Center for Judicial Excellence and being part of this, for your clarity and your candidness. And Senator Rubio, you are, my friend, a shining light on this issue and many others. And I'm grateful for your gift of sharing your story and everything that you are doing, legislative and otherwise, on behalf of domestic violence survivors and teaching the world to pay attention and listen to the women who tell their stories and who express fear and express concerns in domestic violence situations, to pay attention, and all of us to listen.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate the time as well. And to Ana and Kathleen, again, thank you for taking the time to continue to highlight such an important issue. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Rubio, and thank you, Brian.
Yes. Thank you for your leadership, Senator. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, ladies, for this sobering and profound conversation and for your courage and candidness. Senator Susan Rubio of the 22nd Senate District in California's San Gabriel Valley, Kathleen Russell, the founding executive director of the Center for Judicial Excellence in San Rafael, and Ana Estevez, who is a child advocate and forever the mother of Peaky. That brings us to a close of this edition of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus, with technical assistance and production support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulty, Brian Shadden, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.